Welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network, coming to you from the TeacherCast studios since 2011. Join us each week as we bring you the latest educational news, EdTech updates, and hottest interviews with today's most influential leaders in education. And now, for your host, Jeff Bradbury.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network. My name is Jeff Bradbury. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the Jeff Bradbury Show. If you're a blogger, author, speaker, consultant, anybody out there who's getting into the content creation realm, this is that podcast for you. And I am so thrilled today to have with me a good friend and my graphic designer talking all about how you guys can build your brand through graphics and images. But before we get to him and all the good stuff we're going to be talking about, I want to ask you guys, how you doing? How you doing out there? How are your brands? How's your newsletter? What's your website? I'd love to know what you guys are working on. Check out everything over at buildyouredubrand.com. If you haven't, we got a lot of great stuff. I just posted a keynote address that I presented a few weeks ago at the MeTech conference and talked all about how I've been helping my students at school build their brands. Talks a little bit about my technology class, my broadcast journalism class that I did last year. It was a really, really nice opportunity. And of course, we want to say thank you to everybody at MeTech. I had such a good time. My first virtual keynote. If you've never done one of those things, it's a lot different. It's a lot different than doing just regular Zoom calls. So I'd love to hear from you guys about that. We're going to be talking a little bit about that on future episodes as we go through. And again, I want to say thank you guys for checking this out and making TeacherCast your home for professional development. Today, we're going to talk all about graphics. What does your graphics say about you? What does your graphics say about your brand? What does your graphics say to others that are catching you on social media? I want you guys to check out the rest of today's episode with one thing in mind. How many graphics do you have on your website? How many logos do you have? How many logos should you have? We answer those questions all right now on the Jeff Bradbury Show. My guest today is a middle school assistant principal for North Texas School District, where he has an amazing opportunity to serve not only 4 campuses and 2 school districts, but he's also the author of an upcoming book called Aspire to Lead. And he also has an amazing podcast featured on the Teach Better Podcast Network. My good friend, Mr. Joshua Stamper. Josh, how are you today? Welcome to the Jeff Bradbury Show.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's an honor to be on your show, and I'm doing wonderful.
It is so good to see you. So good to have you on. How are things in Texas these days?
Nice and warm, just like we like it.
As we're going through the year, you know, you and I have been talking about building brands, helping people move, getting things in. And, you know, you are one of those guys that is always at the forefront of my mind of this looks perfect. This looks great. I'm so happy that you're here to talk about branding, talk about graphics, something that you have done for me many times. Of course, you're the guy that's created all of our podcast squares. Before we get into all of that stuff, tell the audience a little bit about who you are. Who is Josh Stamper?
Yes. So right now I'm an assistant principal at a middle school, but prior to that, where the graphics come in, as I was actually a graphic designer outside of college. I went to Bethel University, Minnesota, and after that, after I got my degree in art, I was a graphic designer for actually a couple companies and did all of their advertising at that time. But the economy crashed, and so my job was dissolved because everyone was hurting. And so from that point, I went back to school and got my teaching license to actually teach art. So I was an art teacher for 6 years, and I was a coach also at that time. And then that's when it kind of led into being an administrator. So totally a different route right now, but I have the wonderful opportunity to still tinker with graphics with my Aspire podcast.
That's interesting. So you had a full-time non-EDU gig, and then you went back for education. Mm-hmm. Did you do the teaching license, stop, and then admin certificate? What was all that like for you?
No. So yeah, I wasn't expecting to go into education. I was a terrible student growing up. So I wanted to run away from the school. And it's funny, I actually went back to be a coach. That was my main reason going back to school to get my teaching license. And so, yeah, I was an art teacher and a coach at the time, and getting getting a degree in leadership, educational leadership. So That was tough.
What was it like going from graphic artwork into working with kids on stick figures and primary colors?
You got it right. I had a sign that actually said no stick figures in my classroom. That was a big no. No, it was interesting. It was fun, but it took several years to get comfortable with the classroom management piece. Obviously, I was passionate about the concepts and the subject matter. That was the easy part. But feeling like I had the comfort level of managing a classroom was something that took some time, because not everyone was passionate about art. They signed up typically because they thought it was an easy A, something that they didn't need to work hard at. And so to try and change that mindset of a student took some time, and I needed to learn those strategies to let them understand that I wasn't expecting them to be the next Van Gogh. I didn't expect them to, have some art gallery that they were going to do, but I wanted them at least to appreciate it and have some skills. A lot of students just assume that, like, when you are an artist, you just were born with those skills, and that wasn't really the concept. It's just like anything else. If you're wanting to be a musician, you spend thousands of hours working with that instrument before you actually are great at it. And so the same thing is said about graphics and said about art.
So there you were teaching art, no stick figures, right?
Yes.
What was the drive to then go back and get the admin degree and then finally get out of the classroom? Because you just you really didn't like stick figures?
No, I loved my job. Honestly, it was a assistant principal while I started coaching. Because actually, let me back up. When I was an art teacher, I wasn't coaching at the time. We moved from Minnesota to Texas, and I really wanted to focus on just the craft of teaching because it was something new to me, and I wanted to make sure I was doing a good job. It was my third year into teaching that I was asked or had the opportunity to coach. And so I started coaching football, basketball, and track at the time. And within 3 months of that position, my assistant principal tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You are making a much bigger impact on the campus. I think you would be wonderful as an administrator." And so it kind of took me off guard, and came back to talk to my wife just about what that would even look like, and decided that that was a path that I wanted to try out. So a month later, I was in a master's program and starting my internship as an administrator. So it wasn't planned. It was one of those conversations that changed the trajectory of my life completely.
That really is a story about building your EDU brand. You did such a good job in all these different positions. They looked at you as a leader and said, "Come and do this." It is kind of interesting that, especially in education, when you're doing something really good, they pull you away from it and put you in a desk.
Yes.
Kind of an interesting way how we go here. Podcaster, where did this come from?
Yeah. So that's also something that was not planned. I had an opportunity to go visit Todd Nicoloni in Navasota, Texas, when he was a principal of an elementary school. And while I was down there, he was recording a podcast with Adam Welcome for the Kids Deserve It podcast. And I got to see the behind the scenes aspect of that. And I probably asked him 1,000 questions after he was done, because I was just so interested in the concept and the procedure with that. And I had just finished an aspiring administrative program. Me and 5 assistant principals built it from the ground up for our district as kind of a pilot program. And it did so well that after the second year, the district took it over themselves, and the admin building then facilitated that program. And so I was longing to help still with aspiring leaders. And so I just flippantly told Todd, "Hey, I should do a podcast for aspiring leaders." And he was like, "Yeah, you should." And from that conversation, it spawned into 5 months of preparation, trying to decide the name, the logistics, all the different aspects of podcasting, because as you know, it's not easy. And so trying to figure that out to launch. And I'll be doing it, 3 years in May is when the Aspire podcast started.
So you sound like most podcasters, where you made the mistake of saying to another podcaster, "I have an idea. Should I do this?"
Yes.
And next thing you know, you've got a second career out of this. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But then, of course, the other mistake was you had all of these ideas, and I guess it's only logical you named your podcast, the first idea you came up with?
It was the first idea.
It's amazing how that works, right?
Yeah. I did throw it out to a couple of friends, Todd being one of them, and they all loved it. So I stuck with it.
And is there any other reason that Aspire happens to be? Is it because it comes first in the alphabet? It's at the top of many top 10 lists. What does let's put it this way? What does Aspire mean to you?
Aspire was something, well, I'll be honest, it was the most simplistic thing for me in regards to aspiring leaders. I was thinking that's what it was for. The long name is Aspire, the Leadership Development Podcast. But Aspire also, it's something that you're wanting, right? That is your goal. That is where you want to be someday. And I figured, that's what everybody is striving for, hopefully, is that you're wanting to be better every single day. And so I wanted to bring on guests that would help them in their journey wherever they were.
The Leadership Development Podcast. I spoke recently to our mutual friend, Tim Cavey, about his subtitle. Mm-hmm. Yours is short, self-explanatory, the Leadership Development Podcast. There's many other people in our circles that do administrative type, but yours is very short, to the point. Did you always call it the Leadership Development Podcast? Did that come about after you started a couple episodes? Where did that come from?
No, I always had that in the name. Even when I was trying to throw it out with some different podcasters and just said, hey, do you like this idea? I just wanted to make sure that it was a concept that people understood. Like if they were landing on my podcast for the first time, they knew exactly what they were getting from any episode. And I wanted to make sure that was within the title. I didn't want them to think it was Aspire for business or Aspire for cooking or some other possibility. I wanted them to know exactly what the brand was about. And it's for aspiring leaders. It's for those who are probably not in the leadership realm in education, but want to be in. Not to say that current leaders can't listen to it, because there's a lot of current leaders that do. But I wanted to make sure that the mission was within the title.
Now, today we're going to talk all about graphics, something that you've already said that you know a lot about and have done. And, TeacherCast wouldn't be where it was or where it is without you and your amazing graphics. But before we get to talking about that detail, let's talk a little bit about your website, how it is, how did it come about, all that great stuff. The .com on your website, sir, is what?
joshstamper.com.
And why did you choose joshstamper.com versus calling it Aspire Podcast or something to that effect? Why the name, not the brand?
That's a great question. I just assumed that no matter what I'm doing, I wanted to make sure that people found me. Obviously, I do a lot of other things. I speak, and I'm in the midst of writing a book. It's almost published here in a couple of months, hopefully. So I just wanted to make sure that no matter what I was doing, whatever project, that they could land and find me.
And if I was to describe your website, I would say blue and white. Is that a fair term? What?
Yes.
You're obviously the graphic one between the two of us. Why blue and white? Was there a favorite color? It means something. It just looks good in the background. Why blue and white?
Yeah, blue is just a color that I've always had for the Aspire podcast. It's just a consistent color that I've used. So white was the other. I usually use white Aspire within that. And so I just wanted to make sure that I was consistent within the logo, the graphics, and then of course on my website.
And your website is designed where, when, and how? What is the vehicle in which your website is created?
Podcast websites is who I am working with through. Of course, it's a WordPress site, but I host with them, and they do a wonderful job. And thankfully, Jeff Bradbury was the one to help me with that process and to bring me over to that wonderful company.
You can check that out over at teachercast.net/PW for all things podcast websites. And, I do love the consistent branding. That's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about as we get into our graphics topics here. Aspire, you've got mountains. I'm sure that was no coincidence. You've landed on this foresty, mountainy thing. How did you find the graphic? Where did you come from with that? And every time I see your branding, there are those mountains.
What made you get attracted to that particular image or those mountains or that kind of an image for yourself?
Yeah, I thought Aspire, you're looking obviously for a goal, and my wife is really passionate about hiking and climbing mountains, and so we go on vacation quite often to mountainous regions, either in Texas or Colorado, New Mexico, somewhere close to where we live. And yeah, that was just something I thought was a great image of, trying to get someplace that's challenging, and so mountains is kind of something that I landed on. And I just thought it was fitting for just the hardships that every leader has to go through within their journey.
Now, today we're talking about the 5 ways that Josh is recommending us build our EDU brands through graphics. And of course, if you have any questions about this subject, you can reach out to Josh over at joshstamper.com. Josh, what is the first thing that we want to be thinking about when we're looking to build through graphics, when we're looking at putting some images together for our brands?
Yeah, I think kind of what we were just talking about, like when you're in your infancy stage of trying to decide what your brand's all about, is deciding the images or icons that represent your brand. So similar to what I did with, finding mountains, that was an icon that one resonated with me, but then also resonated with the mission of my podcast. So depending on what your service or product is, find the images or the items that associate with what you're trying to get across to the viewer.
And is there locations that you go to for background images? I mean, there's the obvious one is we'll just do a Google image search, but then there's copyright issues.
Sure.
Where do you go out and try to find your graphics? Because they are absolutely stunning.
Well, I use a website called Pexels that has a royalty-free for most of their images. So, obviously you got to make sure that you're looking at each of the images and the copyright pieces there, because each image is a little bit different. However, they have a huge bank of royalty-free images. So there's a lot of websites that do that, where people will upload their images and then they give you the free rights to use that within your different graphics.
Now, looking through your website, I have a question about something specific on here. And so I want to start right now and ask Josh, what is the second thing that we want to think and keep in mind when we're building our brand through our graphics?
Yeah, so you're going to want to create a logo, of course. And so you're going to want to have those key concepts represented within your logo. And so logo design is not easy, but you want to make sure that you're starting to think about your colors, your fonts, of course, the images and things that represent, again, what you're trying to get across to the viewer. So again, I'm using mountains in my logo, and both the larger or the smaller icon logo.
Well, that's where I want to stop here, because I want to ask the chicken and the egg question. Did the logo come before the background mountains, or did you come up with the background mountains and say, I need a logo because that looks kind of cool? What happened first?
Well, my logo's changed actually over the years. I started with one where it had Aspire really large, and in between the letters was filled with mountains. So I think that I had that for about a year, and then I wanted to kind of switch it up because I felt like that image was not very conducive to kind of stamp on different things. And so I switched up my podcast image and created an actual logo. And Jeff, you were actually a big component of that, of sending things to you and trying to get your different ideas and concepts on that. And that's kind of where I landed with where I'm at now with my logo, but then also having a smaller icon, which is an A that's got a mountain on it also.
I do like the fact that your logo means different things. I mean, in my class last year when I was teaching marketing technology, we were talking about things like the FedEx logo, the Coke logo, how they have various things inside of here. You've got this mountain that if you wanted to, it could be an A. I love the podcast logo. I want to ask you in a second here how this came out, because if you're looking at the Aspire podcast logo, there's a mountain with the words, and then there's like an under triangle, which I always look at that. And even though it's a mountain, I always think of the iceberg graphic where even though you see it up on top, there's a lot more underneath, and we're trying to grow. And am I reading into this, or do you have some kind of subliminal message in your logo?
I wasn't trying for the subliminal, but I was also trying to get my name in there also. And so I was looking at it as, it could be, ice, it could be a lake, it could be kind of a metaphor for just anything that's lower. It could be a reflection. So I figured, it could represent multiple things within the image. But honestly, I was trying to find something that kind of completed it, but also gave me some space for my name.
I do like the fact that I think I mentioned this to you when we were talking about it originally, of how the logo fits right in the middle of the two mountains. That's kind of that cup and chalice thing from the Da Vinci Code. I've always looked at it as, and it just seems to work and it just fits. And I think anybody that's out there, if they're looking for graphics, you know what works, what fits, what's you. And let's stop here because we have three more things. But if somebody comes to you, Josh, and says, can you create graphics for me? Can you create a logo for me? What is that process like when you work with a client, when somebody comes to you? When I happen to come and say, make me a logo, what is that like to be on the receiving end of those questions? And how do you help somebody create their own graphics and brand and mission?
Yeah, I love having those. Well, one, it's a conversation, right? It's like what we're doing right now of, what is your brand? What are you about? Kind of get some background information. And then from those conversations, then having kind of a brainstorm session. And so if it's me creating the logo, it's taking those concepts from those conversations and building something out and sending it and, kind of going from there. It's not just, it's not as simple as point A to point B. It's really a little more complex than that. I mean, even just me and you, Jeff, having those conversations about the different images for your podcast, there were 5, 6 different designs that were sent back and forth of, hey, I like this concept. I like, A, B, and C, but can you change D? And so, having those consistent conversations of what works and what doesn't, and then landing on a final product that everyone's happy with. And that's the main goal, is finding something that is going to be long lasting, not something that you look at for a couple months and say, no, I don't like that anymore. It doesn't work for me.
One of the things that I know we've spoken about, and I firmly believe in a website, is you should have an iconic looking website logo, but you should have multiple of those. And that's a hard thing to think about. But if you look at your own site, you have the words Aspire, that's your rectangle. Then you have the podcast logo, which is a square. And then you've got the A. They all are the same exact thing. It's not like the McDonald's arches where it's the same exact thing, but you can look at each of those and I can see Josh in each of those different things. That couldn't have happened by coincidence. You designed it all that way.
Yes, I wanted to make sure I was consistent in everything I did. And it's working more about the brand than a specific one logo. You have to think of everything that you produce is within the same concept of the brand. And so that's kind of like the third thing I was talking about is, you need to stay consistent with the same colors, the schemes, the fonts, the logos, the images, like all of it has to stay the same. And not to say that you have to use the same font in every single thing, but I have a group of like 5 different fonts that I stay. They're like my home fonts that I use, and the color schemes. I stay within those color schemes as much as I can when it has to do with the logo. And not to say that every image has the exact same colors, but if you're on my website, you can definitely see in every page I'm very consistent with the color scheme.
Well, let's stop there, because this is usually where people start to have their head spin, because there's a lot of options. Now, you just said that you've got 5 basic fonts. Are you saying that you have 5 fonts for your website? Or if I gave you a project and somebody else gave you've got 5 fonts that look good and they work together, and you're going to basically know like that, those are Josh's fonts. He uses them all. How does somebody who's just starting out figure out what fonts are good, what fonts are bad, what fonts go with what? Give us the font conversation.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. So
I got time. I got all the time right now.
That's the rabbit hole, right? I mean, if you search just fonts in general, you can find packages of thousands and thousands of font, and it will make your head spin. So yes, I found my 5 fonts from the 500 different fonts that are in Photoshop. Photoshop is an application that I use for all of my designs and graphics, and that's something I've used since college. So Photoshop is not for everyone. It's a pretty advanced application. However, that's what I'm most comfortable with. And so within those package of fonts, then I just chose 5 that worked within, again, my logo and my website. And so for that, like, I try and tell everybody, like, for instance, if let's say you're a rafting company and you're looking for something that's like a logo and some fonts. Well, obviously you're probably going to want something that's wild and courageous and has some movement within the font. If you had like solid block lettering, that doesn't really say whitewater rafting to me. As far as a viewer, it contradicts itself. So a lot of times I tell people, like, try and find a font that correlates as much as possible to the product or the service that you're representing. So I know that's a lot. Usually it's harder than it seems because you have so many different options. But again, I just would ask anyone to look at font almost like an image versus just some lettering.
You're on a deserted island. You can only take 3 fonts with you. Finish that sentence.
I would say that you're going to want to take a bold, a thin, and a medium font.
I don't know what that means.
A thick, a medium, and a thin font.
Okay. So no dingbats or no wingdings. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Something that's legible and gives you some variety. So whatever that font may be.
Is it supposed to be hard, or you've done this and so this is easy? I mean, I get stuck at, do I want a Microsoft font or a Google font? And then you realize that, Photoshop has one of those two. Canva probably has the other one. And how, if you are starting off your brand, do you really have to ask yourself where your digital hard drive is before you figure out the official font? Because if you're running in Teams, you're going to have Microsoft fonts to play with. And if you're running in Drive, you're going to have Google fonts. Should that really determine what your logo looks like?
I always think of the application first. So wherever you're creating your graphics is where you're probably going to want to find your fonts. So like, for instance, if you're in Canva and you're most comfortable with Canva, and a lot of people are, because a lot of times they have things already built within, like templates in Canva. And so like, if you're a starter, most people, that's where they tend to go. And so I would say that's where you're going to want to find your fonts. If you're building it in some other application, then I would also say that's probably where you want to consistently find your fonts. And then, for instance, for me, if I'm going to use a Canva application, then I'm going to want to try and font that's similar to what I'm building in Photoshop, or I can just save what I have in Photoshop and make that something that I can pull into Canva.
I certainly hope this conversation is as riveting to other people as it is to me, talking about fonts and all that great stuff. But there's 2 more things here we're going to talk about. Josh, what is the number 4 thing we want to be thinking about when building our brand through our graphics?
Well, similar to what I was just talking about, like, find the thing that you're comfortable with as far as your application. Find something that you are comfortable with, not to say that you have to stay there forever, but if you are comfortable with Photoshop, then by all means stay there. Illustrator or Canva, or there's a whole host of different applications that you can use for graphics, but I want you to be comfortable, because it's the worst feeling ever, is trying a new program and getting frustrated within 30 seconds and then never wanting to open that up again. So make sure that whatever you're using for your graphics, for your logo, that you are just staying consistent with it and that you're feeling comfortable with that application.
I think it's the single most horrible feeling in graphic design, where you create something, let's just say in Photoshop, or you're given something in Photoshop by somebody, and you have to do something on your own, and you're trying to recreate the Photoshop image exactly in a different, in Canva or in PowerPoint or something. Those are moments of panic for any entrepreneur.
I would agree. That's not a fun project, because there's so many different things that can be done in Photoshop that can't be done in those other applications, especially PowerPoint.
Now, before we get to the last one, I want to talk a little bit about some of the other graphic work that you've done. We've talked about your great website over at joshstamper.com. But in addition to that, you are also a part of a team, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I'm part of the Teach Better team. So I also get to do graphics for them. And I get to do graphics for not only the website, some of the other things, but the podcast network, and then also in their swag store.
And talk to us a little bit about Teach Better. We're looking forward to learning more about Teach Better as we go. We're going to be doing an episode coming up in the next few weeks with Jeff Gargis and perhaps some of his team members. But what is Teach Better? What is the Teach Better podcast network? How'd you guys get connected and hooked up and all that great stuff?
Yeah. So 2 years ago, I had an opportunity to go to the Teach Better team conference in Ohio, and I got to speak. And then also I was on the podcast row with the Aspire podcast and had an opportunity to interview a ton of different speakers that were there. And through that experience, I just had a really good relationship, since then with the team. And from there, myself and Jeff Gargis have been doing an Aspire mailbag. So we've been asking different aspiring leaders for questions, and then we answer that. And we do that probably once a month. So we've been doing that for probably over a year now, probably a year and a half. And yeah, I just had a great time with them. About 6 months ago, they asked if I would be the podcast manager for their new network. And so what we've been doing is just signing a bunch of different podcasts. We're up to 21 podcasts now that are associated with the Teach Better team, and just growing like crazy. And I like to think of the network of kind of like a buffet for the educational space. So no matter where you are in your journey, you're able to go there and find something that's going to help you as an educator.
Teach Better's doing some pretty neat things out there. I'm starting to see a lot of the Teach Better ambassador graphics going around. And of course, if you go to Teach Better's website, everything is on brand. Everything is on par. Great color scheme, great graphics, great swag, all that good stuff. They got you busy over there, don't they?
Yes, they do. Talk about having lots of things to do. Between being an admin, the Aspire podcast, and of course the Teach Better team, it's a lot of fun. But yes, very busy.
So you and I have a few things in common, and I haven't mentioned this on the show yet, but you and I both are now writing a book. You're a few months ahead of me, but we are both writing a book with our friend Sarah over at EduMatch.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about this book that's coming up. Obviously, we'd like to have you guys, have you back on when the thing launches, but talk to us a little bit about what we can be looking forward to in the future from you.
Of course. So Aspire to Lead is the book, and it's kind of what we were talking about with the podcast. It was kind of built from my experience of podcasting and with all the amazing guests that I had. But I just felt like I want to have a memoir of kind of my journey and try and instill some wisdom for those who might be going through the same pitfalls that I did. Obviously, when you go from a teacher to an assistant principal, there are a lot of things to learn, and there's a lot of mistakes that happen. And so I really just kind of go through that and use Aspire as just an acronym to help those who are trying to become a leader.
I'm looking forward to reading that. I'm starting my journey right now. I've been writing about a chapter every 2 days, trying to get through this thing, and looking forward to seeing your book launch and looking forward to helping everybody else's. And, as we're coming through here and we're rounding around this conversation about, graphics, branding, there is one more thing that you want to share with us. What is that fifth thing that we want to be thinking about with our graphics? It sounds so easy, and yet I see so many people missing it.
Yeah. And the last one is just make sure you place your logo on all your graphics. There's so many times that someone will create something and it could be absolutely fabulous, but they do not put their logo on it, and they don't give anyone any idea of who the creator is. And that's so important with graphics, especially in the social media age, where things are shared constantly. And so, whenever you have something that might be of interest in the educational space or in the business space, you want to make sure that when it's shared, that your logo and your icon is recognizable and can be shared out and seen by many.
What do you mean by that? I've seen graphics where the person's logo is artistically in the middle of this somewhere. And then I've seen logos like my own where you just smack that apple right in the middle or right on the side or the corner and wherever it happens to lie. I try to keep the apple in the same spot every single time. Templates. What's your thoughts on all this stuff?
I don't know if it needs to be in the exact same place, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with that either. I just think the main thing is you need to have it somewhere so that, again, it's about building a brand. You want people to see it as much as possible, and they want to make sure you need to make sure that they're recognizing that it's you. So you want to make sure that you have it on every single thing that you produce, and especially something that, if you're putting on Instagram stories or if you're putting on Facebook, and again, if it's being shared on Twitter, whatever it may be, you want to make sure that it's visible. So you need to make sure that you understand the dimensions of the social media application also. So for instance, if I have an Instagram post and I put that and I post it on Twitter, the dimensions are different. And if I have that in the bottom right corner, and that's where my logo is, it's not going to be seen in the post. So it could be shared out a ton, but unless they actually click on the image and open it up to see the entire image, then only will they see the logo. So again, you need to make sure that you're looking at the dimensions of your social media application. So that might have something to do with the placement of your logo. If you're doing an Instagram post and you're going to use it for multiple social media applications, then, you're going to want to put it in the middle, because then Twitter will see it, Instagram will see it, LinkedIn will see it. So you just need to be aware of the dimensions. That's, again, something that's forgotten even by myself sometimes.
So in review here, we have number 1, decide what images are going to be representing of yours. Create a logo whose key concepts represent the service and the product. Stay consistent with your color schemes, fonts, logos, images. Create your graphics on an application that you're comfortable with. And then finally, place your logo on all the graphics. But Josh, I got to say, that sounds way too easy. I remember clearly 10 years ago, sitting there at 1:30 in the morning, the word TeacherCast came, and all I knew was I wanted an apple with a mortar board. And I put these things together and slapped a big TC with italic font. And I said, that's me, baby. Here I come. I didn't know what I was doing. And over the last 10 years, it's evolved a little bit. I still don't know what I'm doing, but talk to those people that are out there that are looking at this for the first time. Maybe they have their own logo that they want to evolve. Is it easier for you to start and create something? Or in my case with you, here's what I got, now take it to the next step. Talk to that new person out there that's just sitting there looking at their Canvas screen today going, what do I do?
Well, I always think it's a little bit easier to take someone's original concept and to morph it to what they want it to be, because at least it's something to start with. I think that's always easier than starting with a blank canvas. But I will also say that for those who are thinking they have to have a winning design from day one, that it's okay for things to evolve. If you look at, you said McDonald's earlier, if you look at the 1950s McDonald's versus the McDonald's logo now, you'll notice that there's differences. And that goes for any icon that you can think of. Slogans, music, all of that changes over time for every brand. And so you will notice, though, that there's consistency. The golden arches have always been the golden arches. And that's how we know them, right? Even though their graphic and their logo has changed over time. So I just want everyone to understand that even though your graphic, you may not be happy with that, it can and should evolve over time. I mean, that's just with any company, with any product. And so I just want to give any listener right now that's thinking they have to have something that's amazing from day one, that's not the case. But to answer your question, yeah, it's much easier to take someone's creation and to morph it to maybe something that's a little bit better.
The website is joshstamper.com. And of course, you can check out the Aspire, the Leadership Development Podcast on all of the great platforms here, from Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, you name it. He is on there. His name is Josh Stamper. Josh, thank you so much for coming on today, sharing a little bit about this. I'm looking forward to working with you on the future book as we put it all together, and good luck with yours. And, please invite yourself on any time, and I look forward to also working with you and the Teach Better team in the future.
Can't wait, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
And we want to say thank you guys out there for checking this out and listening to this. And I hope that something that we've talked today is going to help you guys build your EDU brand. Don't forget to check out everything at buildyouredubrand.com for more information. Follow me on Twitter at Jeff Bradbury. And of course, all the great stuff over at the TeacherCast Educational Network is yours 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that wraps up this episode of the Jeff Bradbury Show. On behalf of Josh and everybody here in the TeacherCast Educational Network, my name is Jeff Bradbury, reminding you guys to keep up the great work in your classrooms and continue sharing your passions with your students.
You've been listening to the TeacherCast Educational Network, hosted by Jeff Bradbury. Please reach out to the show with all of your questions on Twitter at TeacherCast or online at www.teachercast.net. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. And please take a moment to write a review in the App Store.